Yeah, finally I got hold of Trey. Trey, are you there?
I'm here with you, Michael. It's great.
Okay, let me just turn the music down. So we've got Trey Smith here at Radio Eden. Welcome, Trey. It's great to have you here on air.
It's Michael. It's fantastic to be talking to you today.
Just a brief introduction to our listeners. First of all, it's a live broadcast here, so welcome to Radio Eden. This time live, coming from the heart of England to the heart of Texas, and all to you. And Trey Smith is an author. That's right, Trey?
Yes, I'm a guy here in the United States, wherever you're listening from. I live in the United States. I live in Texas, so I live in a mountainous area with rocks and that kind of thing. But out here in the United States, people tend to know me from a book titled Thieves, where I actually committed a safe robbery on a television caster in 1999. But what I mainly do that was a long time ago, and I was a different guy when that happened. So what I'm intent to talk today about on Radio Eden is a new video that's coming out that goes over not only Enoch but the Nephilim.
Okay, Trey, let me stop you there quickly. You talk about a new video. Now, to our listeners, very important. You can actually check out those videos. Trey, quickly tell me your YouTube website or your website.
It's just godinanutshell.com. So you can go over to God in a Nutshell and you can pick through the videos over there. Everything from the Book of Enoch to why evolution doesn't work. And I know a lot of you guys in the UK and Germany, because I can look at the stats on this thing and I can see that there's a lot of you folks that really like the theory of evolution out there in Europe and the United Kingdom. And I would encourage you, no matter how much that you like that theory inside, I would really encourage you to take a sober look. That video took 4 months to make, every day, spending many times 18-hour days on it, and going through systematically the reasons why this has failures in science, from the fossil record to obviously the historical text it disagrees with. Nobody would argue that. But in terms of what we know today about genetics and biology, the outlook for evolution is grimmer and grimmer. And I would really, in fact, plead with you, particularly if you're in the UK or Germany, to abandon all preconceived ideas, just like I have to do. Whenever I'm researching something, the greatest discoveries that I ever find in any piece of research is when I'm willing to let everything go, let the cards fall where they may, and let the data speak to me, not me explain to it how I want it to be. And I would ask you to have the courage to do the same thing. And I honor those of you that are able to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think very often we just fall into the trap of just taking everything people tell us from school, from primary school as granted, and without really ever questioning it. And it's important. I mean, even if you don't want to follow a different concept other than evolution, it's important to at least be open to question it and to be open to criticism. And I think it's important. So the video came out in April, is this right? I had a look on your website, and there was one video, quite a long one, on evolution, creationism, in April. Did I get it right?
That particular one, there are two of them. There are two of them that came out this year on that topic, because that's an important topic. And here in the United States, there's been quite a few things that have come out this year that are more and more aggressive towards that perspective. For example, Stephen Meyer and the Discovery Institute. His book, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think it was a New York Times bestseller for a period of time this year. And this is a man that goes through the genetics. So this is one of the head spokespeople for what they call intelligent design. He's an interesting guy to listen to. But you've also got this coming at you from a number of different other somewhat interesting aspects here in the States. For example, and surprising even to me, the New Age community, when you're dealing with folks that have a tendency to believe in aliens and this type of thing, a lot of that camp, and not all of their arguments are to be taken frivolously. I mean, they're presenting, at least in terms of the evolution stuff, they're presenting data that I myself find fascinating. The problems with this are innumerable, and it's been very much a burden on our educational institutions. And also, in my opinion, Michael, here's the truth. In my opinion, the educational institutions, not just here in the United States, but also out there, right where you're sitting today, Michael, are designed to make people smart enough to screw nuts on bolts and just dumb enough not to ask any questions about whether or not being paid for it. So yes, I would question what's in those books. The amount that we know about our universe, about reality itself, is extremely trite. What we do not know is much larger than what we do.
Yeah, true. I agree. I think sometimes there's this analogy about, if somebody's 12 years old, they think they know pretty much everything. If they're a teenager, they think they're just a few bits to learn. If they're a teenager, they know everything. And by the time you hit your 20s, you think, maybe there's still a lot more to come. When you're in your 40s and 50s, it's just nothing, really. There's so much out there. And I think the older I get, the more I realize how big the secrets of the universe really are. Especially, all you need to do is just ask questions. Just ask questions about the universe, about some of the theories which are sort of sprouted about. And if you do that, you just realize, there are so many questions and answers are just missing. People don't fully understand very often what they're talking about, even though they would call themselves scientists. But all they do is, I believe very often, is just scratching the surface. And it goes deeper and deeper and deeper the more you research into a certain area.
No, in fact, there's an old joke that goes along with that. If you really want to hide something, really well, you put it right out there in front of the scientific community, in front of the university professors, because they're sure not to find it as long as you hide it directly in front of them. And but yeah, this in terms of what you were just saying a second ago, and that you go through these phases where at 50 years old you're looking at it differently than you did when you're in your 20s. In the case of a lot of this stuff that gets pitched in the educational community, particularly in regards with evolution, what you're dealing with, you can watch it. I can visually watch it on the screen. That people, when they're in their 18 to 22-year-old range, they believe that they know everything. When they're entering their 30s, they're starting to question everything. By the time they're in their 40s and their 50s and on out, they really are looking for answers, because these are the answers that we should have been reaching for when we had our strength and our energy. We lose those years and only begin to ask the questions that fundamentally matter most.
Yeah, that's right.
As we're hitting an old age. Yeah. And the people there to give us answers are people there that are there to do nothing more than to make $1 off of you, to raise your taxes, or to feed you some type of lunchbox answer, so they can make a quick buck off you, because they don't care about you. Yeah. And these are the questions that matter most. Who are we? Where do we come from? What happens next?
Yeah, it's probably worthwhile to say that very often universities are funding driven, and so you have to research within a common consensus to have your papers accepted and to move further. If you don't, you get ostracized from the community, and the result is your funding might go down as well as a result of it. Trey, go back to the Book of Enoch. Book of Enoch is mentioned in the Bible. It's not a book of the Bible, very important to state, but it is mentioned in the Bible. That's right.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, and that's in fact this thing that I've been working on. Anyone that's tuning in and you've been waiting for the next video to come out, let me state to you clearly that this one is packed with a lot of research that I didn't have even a month ago. And some of the things that I'm going to be going over right now with Michael on the phone are things that have been discovered even within the last number of days in looking at these texts and documents. That being stated, let me say this, Michael. It's my strongest opinion that Book of Enoch has to be taken extremely seriously.
Okay, why? Go ahead.
Well, the book of the book itself. This was a book that was kicked out of the Bible by the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's absolutely clear. Let me start with what they used to argue about it. Initially, the argument against the Book of Enoch was that it must have been written in the Middle Ages. There's some fundamental reasons why that's not true. We'll go through those in a second. After they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, which really kills that argument in its entirety, there were 10 portions, 10 fragments of those scrolls that all come from different parts of the Enoch text. Okay? And so these scrolls put you well before Jesus Christ by at least 100 years. The scholars will debate on how old the discoveries there in the Qumran cave really were. But now we're at least 100 years before Jesus Christ, and we're talking about a text that's prophesying the coming of Jesus Christ. At least 12 times in that text does it refer to the coming of the Son of Man,
the first coming, or the second coming.
Well, it's going to talk to you. It's going to walk you through both comings, actually. But its focal point is actually really on the first one. A lot of Enoch is concerned with two different things. Number one, the last generation. The book starts with, this is a book that is not for my generation, but for a remote one.
Okay.
Which is.
May I make a point here? It's quite interesting. And the point is that when you look at biblically at the flood of Noah, Enoch would have been in the last generation before the flood as well. And so I would say there's quite an interesting parallel between Enoch being in the last generation and the Bible talks about that he was taken away, he was with God, and then Noah built the ark, the flood came. And a new era in mankind starts. And interestingly, Enoch speaks about probably his generation being one of the last ones before the flood, and only Noah and his family being saved. And then obviously we've got Jesus referring, that before he comes back, it's going to be like in the days of Noah, and that's what he describes the last generation to. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, sure. It's almost like a complete cycle. I mean, if you and those that don't learn history are doomed to repeat it. But it's more than that. The scope of what Enoch is telling you is not some kind of Mayan calendar cycle. He literally is walking you through. If you believe that book is authentic, as I do, and I'm going to try and give you some practical reasons why I believe that. But if you believe that text is true, then you're stuck in a very eerie and precarious position, because it is telling you sentence by sentence through that flood a lot of things historically that we know occurred. It's walking you through events of history leading all the way up to Jesus Christ, leading through the time period that we call the church, or that the Christians call the time period of the Gentiles, leading all the way to the second coming of Christ, and the Great Tribulation, or the guy that we call the Antichrist. And the truth is that the word Antichrist is only used one time in the Bible. There are 33 titles for the Antichrist in the Old Testament. There are 13 in the New. Only one time is the word Antichrist used. It's as good of a term as any, but the numerics of things always fascinate me as well. In that particular case, 33 references in the Old Testament, 13 in the New. But going back to the book of Enoch, yes, it's taking you through history. So at one portion, this book is divvied up into 5 parts. The first part of the book is going to deal with the fallen angels. Okay, and this is where you get words like Nephilim from. I could also make a good case for you that this is where you get ideas like the aliens from, etc. Because what's happening there in those pages is that you have a group of 200 quote-unquote angels, fallen angels, the B'nai Ha-Elohim. And this word in Enoch can mean watchers, it can mean angels, it can mean fallen angels. These are direct creations of God that make entrance to this place. And they're going to have physical offspring with human women. And nowhere in the text is it telling you that this was necessarily consensual. In fact, it's pretty well insinuated that this probably was not consensual by any stretch of the imagination. Nonetheless, these things are going to breed offspring. And it's that offspring that you're hearing about when you hear people use the term Nephilim. Now, this commonly gets attributed to giants. It becomes synonymous with giants. In fact, it's translated in in your King James Bible as gigantes or giants. That's because they tended to be giants, but it by no stretch of the imagination is only limited to being giants. It's more of an umbrella term for any high strangeness of creation that is a product directly the B'nai Ha Elohim, the fallen angels. When you're dealing with angels in general, people often depict angels as having wings, and these are beings that that have wings, and they're holding they're flying around in the air. And not one spot in any of the texts can I find angels when they're present here on earth with wings. In all points in the text, when they're here on earth, from Jesus's tomb to even Paul himself writing that be careful lest you entertain angels unaware. These things look like men. Now, when you're talking about when you've got descriptions that come from heaven, when you get descriptions of the archangels and such, these are these do in fact have wings.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the one thing sort of which strikes me about the Nephilim and the angels and all that. There seems to be quite a lot of interest in that subject in these days, probably more so than ever before. I don't remember so many people talking about it. I've got a friend in California, and sort of in her circle of friends, same thing. They they talk about this all the time, and it seems to be really catching a lot of interest, which I find quite bizarre in a way. As I say, I've been a Christian for well over 30 years now. Well over? How old am I? Quick question. No, exactly 30 years. And and I don't remember any time where this subject was mentioned so often. And I've noticed as well on your website that the Book of Enoch, the question of the Nephilim, the last days, tends to get a lot of hits, and I find the same on the Radio Eden TV channel. It's the same thing. Anything to do with end time, and also anything to do with Enoch, seems to capture a lot of interest, and the majority of the hits go to those films, which seems to suggest that people are looking for something. They sense there's something in the air. They sense, I think, that possibly that Christ is coming back. And to be fair, his return is closer than, that's just logic. His return is closer than what has ever been before. But
if you were going by the Book of Enoch, the return is extremely close. You are living in and also if you were looking at the Book of Daniel, there's some distinct similarities between. Now they're clearly different authors. You can see the different writing styles and such in these texts, but there are three texts in the Bible that to me really stand out as your prophetic end time texts. Well, two just in the Bible proper, and that would be Daniel, right, who is called God's beloved. Okay, and then you've got John, who would write the book of Revelation, who Jesus referred to as his beloved. Both of these men are describing events that are leading towards the end time, and one of the things that really shakes people when they look at the book of Daniel is this issue that they call Daniel's 70 weeks. Now, when you do the math on Daniel's 70 weeks, Daniel is taking you from the order to rebuild the temple, and so 60, and these are 69 weeks of years. Now, I'm not going to drag you through the math on these, but the way that the math comes out is that if you were, your first marker is the order to rebuild the temple. If you were to do the math of 60 weeks of years and take that to the 69th week, you're going to have the very day and date that Jesus Christ rode the donkey through the front gate of Jerusalem. On top of this, Daniel, sentence by sentence, is walking you through history in the most remarkable. This is what has caused people to say, oh, it's got to be a fake, it's got to be a fraud, but it's not. It's an authentic text. It's predicting the rise of Alexander the Great and the splitting of the four empires and underneath Alexander. And the two that it's going to follow the closest in Daniel's prophecies leading to Jesus Christ and ultimately leading to the Antichrist when you're dealing with the book of Daniel is he's going to follow the empires of Ptolemy and Seleucus. So these two. Now the Septuagint was translated under Ptolemy, which came right after Alexander the Great's death. Ptolemy was the one who commissioned the production of the Septuagint, which is changing the old Hebrew text into Greek. So every prophecy that came after the delivery of that Septuagint cannot be argued as a fraud. And these are sentence by sentence accuracy. It gives me a shiver every time that I go through those. Here's what you're also finding in the book of Enoch to a much larger degree. But the book of Enoch, yes, the part that catches the people, the part that grips hold of them, is when you're talking about angels. And again, you're not talking about, in my opinion, you're not talking about winged creatures. You're not talking about Hallmark cards. You're talking about actual dimensional entities that are stepping into this place in three-dimensional bodies. My presumption is that they've got the apparatus to make this work as well. But they're producing in this place offspring. And that offspring would be the reason, it's the stated reason in both Enoch and the book of Genesis, when you're dealing with Genesis 6, for the flood of Noah that would come. This is 1,000 years, at least, in those texts. 1,000 years of breeding of all sorts of creatures. Now, and when you're looking at Enoch's text, you're looking at the fallen angels that committed a sin against the men and women, yes, but it's going farther than that and saying that they committed sins against the fish and against the birds of the air and against the animals of the field. Now, when you begin to look at some of the ancient cultures like the Babylonians, the Sumerians, particularly the Egyptians, who preserved their stuff so well in stones that have lasted the ages of time, you're looking at depictions of things that marvel us. Because you've got the gods are bird-headed creatures. You've got Ra, and you've got Thoth, which has the head of a bird-looking thing as well, and a jackal-headed creature. When you're dealing with Babylonian gods that would ultimately lead in some degree to modern-day Catholicism, you've got gods such as Dagon, the fish god, the fish-headed god. Which, coincidentally enough, when the book of Jonah, which is one of the lesser read books of the Bible, but we all know the story, right? That Jonah was swallowed by a whale because he was running from God, so he gets thrown off of a ship, gets swallowed by a whale, gets spit up on a seashore of some people that would not listen to God, right? God had sent Jonah to go talk to this group of people, and Jonah did not want to go, right? So, and he was explaining to God the whole time, screaming out to God, and even shaking his fist at God, which is the problem. He was running from God. That these people will never listen; they will never turn from their evil ways. What's fascinating is if you study when he got spit up in Nineveh, he gets spit up on the shore. The god these people worshipped was Dagon, the fish-headed god. And here's a guy getting spit out of a fish to tell them that they've got to repent or that God is going to destroy them. It's fascinating how God does things.
Yeah, I never knew this. Actually, this is quite an interesting revelation there about Dagon and the Ninevites. Interesting stuff.
It's amazing what you find in the pages of our history. And what we're doing is we're assuming that our history has always been the way that it is today. We're focused on our iPads and our mortgage payments and whatever we're doing in our day-to-day lives. This just simply wasn't the case for thousands of years. And it's not just that these people are drawing things on walls that baffle us. It's deeper than that. The physical evidence is there on the place of the planet Earth. One of the things that's going in this new video is a lot of video that comes out of Peru. Now, by no means are elongated skulls only found in Peru. They're found in Russia. They're found in Siberia. They're found in Bolivia. They're found in Mexico. They're found right out there in Germany, where this radio broadcast, I believe, is coming out of. There's hundreds of these things. Now, and this is just one type of anomaly that we've got on the face of the planet Earth, are these elongated heads. Now, the archaeological community, what they've argued for quite some time now, is that this is produced by binding the baby's heads, which is in fact true. There are tribes which have bound heads to get an effect of an elongated head. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about skulls that are twice the size of a human skull. I'm talking about skulls where the actual skull bone structure is different than a human being. A human being has two plates in the back of the cranium. These skulls have one enormous skull cap. Those skull caps can be 25% at minimum larger than a normal human skull. These skeletons have a lot of differences to them that you're not dealing with something that is anatomically, nor is it genetically a human being, in my opinion. You can see that from the bone structure. There's differences in the bone structure. You cannot change two plates in the back of the head into one plate by putting a binding on a baby's head, nor do you change the size of that head. And the truth is that this stuff is all over the place. It just doesn't get talked about. It doesn't make it on your mainstream medias. And I'm not talking about photoshopped images that pop up on YouTube. I'm not talking about, and I'm not saying that's what all of that is by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not talking about things that I can't verify, that I can't talk to a doctor somewhere that can give me a high definition video and walk around the skull and show it to me and hold it up for me. I'm talking about stuff we've got in hand. And there's hundreds of these. Now, when you're talking about stuff that has disappeared in history, old photographs, for example, we got a skeleton out there with horns that disappeared when it made its way to the Smithsonian Museum. A lot of stuff disappears. Somehow a lot of stuff, particularly here in the United States, you have finds. I find newspaper articles all over the place that end at about the 1950s. I even find pictures of giants. There's a picture of a giant in Mongolia in National Geographic magazine that ran one time in the 1950s. You've got article clippings of giants that range anywhere from 9 to 14 feet being found at dig sites. The most famous of these would be in Ohio, but that's by no stretch of imagination the only one. And when I say newspapers, I'm talking about the New York Times. I'm not talking about some local little ho-dunk place that's not in business anymore. I'm talking about the largest newspaper in the entire country was running articles about this stuff, and it evaporates. Beginning in the 1950s, you see no more talk about this stuff. You'll see claims of the skeletal structures being found at the site. The newspaper people will cover it. They'll do a report on it. The archaeologist that found it will tell you what the measurements were. The stuff will make its way over to some museum, typically the Smithsonian, and then from that point forward, nobody finds it again, which makes one believe that archaeology does work in some sense like the Indiana Jones movie, where when you really find something, it disappears into a box in the back of a warehouse somewhere in favor of glowing rocks, pieces of the Titanic, and old dinosaur bones. There are a great number of things that have been found on this planet Earth that baffle and amaze us. And in fact, we're just dealing with the flood account alone. The flood of Noah is something that, amazingly enough, is still an article of debate, not amongst scholars that research the text, but certainly amongst university professors, particularly liberal university professors, are going to argue until they're blue in the face that there wasn't a flood. And if there was a flood, it was a local flood. Well, let's go with that for just a second. Let's go with that. Let's go with that for just a minute. Let's see how that plays out. You've got at least 277 texts on the face of the planet Earth that talk about a flood. 90% of these, notice I said 90% of these, are talking about a global flood and specifically state that in the document. 65% of these are telling you about a guy building a boat to save his family. About 50% of these are going to talk about saving the animals. Now you're down to about 10% of them when we go as far as talking about there's 8 people on the boat. But this is your workout. And some people will argue the amount of texts on the planet Earth is more like 2,000 that are covering the flood event. But 277 is fair enough for me. There's at least 277 flood accounts. Now, what do you see in terms of the physical evidence on the ground? You've got whales that are found in deserts, like, for example, the Atacama Desert. You've got whales. You've got more than, I forgot how many whales. It's more than 60. These are full-size. These aren't baby whales. These are full-size whales of every conceivable type that are found in a mass graveyard in the most arid desert on the entire earth. So these whales, I guess they wiggled out there somehow. You've got seashells found on not just one or two mountaintops. You find me a mountain range on the planet Earth that does not have seashells on it, fossilized fish on it, fossilized marine life on it, animals blasted into the side of cliff walls. When you're talking about dinosaur remains, which, by the way, is the least of what there is when you're dealing with fossils. It's just the part that's exciting because these were real big lizards. But the truth is that the underneath of the ground that you're walking on every day is littered with all sorts of stuff, from dead deer to every possible type of animal is fossilized, mixed in there with dinosaurs. And these creatures are typically found in herds, which means that the dinosaurs, for example, most dinosaur burials are mass graveyards. The animals are compressed and packed together. That's because whatever happened to them happened when they were herding. Solar dust did not fall on these creatures and create the fossil record. You need pressure to create a fossil. So question one should start with, how does something the size of a Bronchiosaurus get 50 feet underground and compressed into a fossil? Now, here's your next thing. This is one of the ones that I really like, is that you've got trees that go vertical underground. Not just one or two. You've got thousands of these all over the underneath of the planet Earth. They're down there with the dead animals. You've got dead stuff blasted underneath the ground, which, by the way, the sedimentary layers that they're using to geologically date these fossils, those are exactly the way stuff settles out. If you put it in a big tank of water and you took different sediments, like what they're using to date with, and you shook your tank around, that's the way that it would settle. Now, it would not settle that way if you had solar dust falling on the Earth. In fact, which is what this is created either by volcanoes, solar dust. There's a limited amount of ways to get extra dirt on top of dirt. None of those ways would cause the geological columns that they're using to do dating, the layers to come out the way that they do. Interestingly enough, liquefaction would. Liquefaction means the whole place was covered with water. Back to the trees, though. The trees go vertical. Now, a lot of these go horizontal, which allows those that don't believe in the flood to take in a deep breath. Thank the Lord that it was horizontal, right? Because it's in the layer. But here's the problem. You've got thousands. Maybe thousands of thousands. Oh, dare I just go ahead and say it. There are tens of thousands of trees underneath the ground that go vertical. And these layers are supposed to represent millions of years. Well, if you've got thousands of trees that are going vertical through layers of earth that are supposedly millions of years old, then that would have to mean that your tree was standing upright for millions of years. The oldest tree on the face of the planet Earth is almost 5,000 years old. So you can do the math on that, which coincidentally, I like the oldest tree because the oldest tree takes us right to our Sumerian text. When did the flood happen? In Genesis. When did it happen in the Sumerian text? Well, our oldest tree is almost like a memorial to that, because I'm telling you 5,000 years, and coincidentally, is how old that little tree sucker is. Our oldest tree on Earth is about 5,000 years old. Well, as coincidence would have it, if you're looking at the Masoretic or you're looking at the Septuagint, you're going to come up with a date of about 3000 BC. Now, you can push that date some. You can push that back to some guy. There's some guys out there that wrote up a pretty compelling article that the flood was in 3434 BC. Right, and they based this on some astrological stuff. I don't know exactly when the flood was, but I know this, that whether it was in 3000 BC or whether it was in 3500 BC or whether it was in 2800 BC, that I know this, that your first little settlements turning into Egypt don't start occurring until about 2800 BC. And your first pyramid does not begin to rise. And I actually disagree with these numbers, but let's go with them. The mainstream theme is that it's at 2600 BC. Let's just say that's right. That's fine with me. So at 2600 BC, you've got your first pyramid taking shape. Okay, this is not the Great Pyramid of Giza, because they made a lot of tries at pyramids. You got the bent pyramid out there. You've got the aliens weren't doing a good job pyramid building.
Yeah.
You have quite a collection of pyramids out there that are your starter pyramids, and before those you had ziggurats, and what you've got is tiny settlements. Noah's Ark is said to have landed in the Urartu mountain range. Now, if you fall just down from the Urartu mountain range you're going to find Egypt, following the fertile land alongside the Nile River right there. And if you go the other way, you find what we call Mesopotamia, or the Fertile Crescent, what is now common day, stretching down in there to common day Iraq, Baghdad. In fact, Baghdad is just down the road from ancient Babylon. Babylon is just next door to ancient Ur, where you've got the city of Uruk, which is called by many, if not most, the oldest city in the world. That city dates, if you were to look at that city would look like nothing to you more than a small village. But this was a place described where your first Sumerian king ruled out of. Just a little bitty place, just a little bitty speck out there, right? And this city of Ur is your first king, Gilgamesh, recorded in the Sumerian text. Gilgamesh is believed to have lived and written his Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest epic in the world, is somewhere between 2700 and 2900 BC. You've got these little bitty tiny settlements that all take shape right there.